We're living in a moment where everything feels faster. Decisions, information, expectations, systems. And for many leaders, that speed is starting to feel less like progress and more like pressure. What I find interesting is that while technology, especially AI, is accelerating the outside world, it's quietly exposing something on the inside. How we think under stress, how we decide when things are unclear, and how grounded our leadership really is. Today's conversation is not about tools, trends, or optimization. It's about leadership clarity when everything accelerates. And my guest today is Jon Sheldon. He's the founder of Billowwood Coaching. We just practiced that, so hopefully that was okay. So Jon is a former Marine. He's a business owner and leadership coach, and his work is rooted in reality, discipline, and radical honesty. That radical honesty, which I love. And he's led people in combat environments and in business. And obviously, you can count 1 + 1, what that brings in. So what he teaches is not theory, but how to stay clear-headed, decisive, and human under pressure. So in a time when leaders face more noise and more systems and more complexity and more demand and more requests than ever before, this conversation is about what actually holds up. And we're going to talk about stoic leadership, which I find so exciting because I've never touched this subject from the stoic perspective on this podcast before. So we're going to talk about stoic leadership, personal discipline, decision clarity, building internal systems so that pressure doesn't turn into chaos in our heads and around us. So if you're leading a team, a business, or yourself through this complexity right now, I think this conversation will meet you exactly where you are. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you so much, Susanna.
I'm so excited to have you here. We talked about snow just before we started recording. So upstate New York, where you're from, is the same snowy environment than here in Helsinki, Finland. Or, I mean, if you talk about the Lapland, the northern parts of Finland, that's heavy set. We're comfortably in our snow era here. AI era is another question, isn't it? It's another topic.
Yeah.
So if you as a leader are not prepared for the AI era and the understanding that this is really not just about the tools and the technology, that's the tip of the iceberg, if you will. Before we go into this leadership under pressure conversation, Jon, can you briefly walk us through your background from the Marines to business ownership and coaching, and what ultimately led you to this work?
Yeah, I love the question, and thank you so much again for having me. So I grew up in, like a lot of Marines, I grew up in a very tiny town in rural America, and I felt this calling when I was in high school. I did really well in high school, but just had this calling that I should do something more. There was this really famous battle in the Iraq War called the Battle of Fallujah. And when I was watching the names come up on the screen of all the Marines that had passed away, I was shocked. The first time in my life, I realized how old they were. And I think when you're looking at and you're watching cinema, every actor that's playing or portraying a soldier or Marine, they're always like in their late 20s or 30s, you know? Mm-hmm. Like I just watched a movie with Chris Hemsworth and he's like 35. You know, Every Marine I served with basically was between the ages of 18 and 22. And so it was this weird thing that clicked in my brain of like, oh, these guys are me, you know, and I never really recognized that before, even though my uncle and my grandfather were both Marines. And so I felt this calling. And so I decided to go into the Marine Corps infantry. I progressed pretty quickly through there as far as rank is concerned. I got pegged to be an infantry squad leader after my first deployment. And really my leadership journey began really in high school on sports teams, but really accelerated massively once I got into the Marines, like day one. Like I knew that this was the environment that I needed in my life. I didn't know I needed it until I did. We were talking about snow. Like I was that very stereotypical snowboard rat, you know, like I was that dude, you know, and I was going to go to a college in Vermont that was near a mountain. That was my whole thing. And so the Marine Corps really helped me in that discipline and getting my mind straight about like, what life could possibly be. And I did that. And so I did that for 4 years. I did 2 deployments to Iraq. I've led 13 Marines through over 150 missions. And then I decided that for me, it was time to exit. And so I left and I went directly to college. There was no break for me. I just got out. 10 days later, I was in my first college class, which is a remarkably different story. You know, you're really not that far away in age from the rest of the college students when you really look back at it. Like, what's 3 years? What's 4 years? But you're vastly further in here.
Yes.
You know, and so it's really hard to relate to younger people in that environment, especially when you're used to this more direct way of communicating, truthfully, and ownership, where you own everything in your life as a Marine. You have to, otherwise you're judged on that, really, on every action. And so that was really frustrating as getting out. But you know, you get into it. I ended up landing. Long story short, I started a landscaping company after I worked at a landscaping company because I thought I was undercompensated, and I was like, well, let's just try and do it myself. And me and a buddy did that for like 2 years, and it was fun. But that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. And I was like, oh, okay. So if you're good at something and you have a lot of grit and grind, you can make it work.
Yeah.
Ish, right? And so, you know, was this like this amazing success? No, I wouldn't say that. Did I do way better than I did at the landscaping company I was working at? Yep. And that proved a point to me, like skill, knowledge, grit, and a good idea, and you can figure something out. So this is totally switching gears. Ended up going into finance, got my degree in business management. Yeah. Honestly, my buddy from high school was a financial advisor, and I saw him meeting with a client one day, and I went up to him. Like a month later, he offered me an internship. I became pretty good at it and just made a 14-year career out of it from there. Ended up owning and running my own practice in finance, moved into the director of sales for a large financial company in the States, and then ultimately figured out that wasn't really my path. The aspects of what I love to do all went back to coaching, mentorship. Like that's what I loved about the Marine Corps. That's what I loved about financial planning was mentoring and coaching your clients. And that's what I loved about the director level position was mentoring and coaching younger advisors. So that's where we landed. And then I started Bellawood in 2021. And here we are.
Wow. That's what you call scale.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, obviously you've, as you said, you've led people in that specific combat environment, but also in business. And from your experience, what does real pressure actually reveal about leader?
First and foremost, it truly reveals their character. One of the core aspects of leadership, from my opinion, the one that you have to get right, is that you have to be others focused. So you have to care about others more than yourself. I think in under really high pressure situations, whether it's in combat or in business, that's the first thing that it reveals is what does that leader do initially? Do they self-protect, which should be their natural instinct, right? Is self-preservation, or do they protect others? Do they strive to make sure that others first? Simon Sinek wrote a great book. It's a military concept called "Leaders Eat Last." He wrote a great book about it. But that's that mentality that gets revealed under pressure. Is where do you place yourself on that leadership spectrum when everything seems to be falling apart, or maybe it's not falling apart, maybe it's all good stuff, but there's just a high pressure situation. And where do they start to really thrive, and where do they see themselves? As far as the recognition is concerned on that level too. Like again, leaders promote others and want others to be better than themselves, in my opinion. Like that is really the goal of leadership on a very basic level of business is to create people that far exceed you. You know, and I think pressure reveals that immediately is what do they gravitate towards? If they gravitate towards themselves and self-preservation, it's a red flag.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you think about the standard organizational chart, the leaders are always on the top. I like to turn that around because I think that leaders are the enablers, the platform where the employees jump forward and step up and progress. That kind of a sentiment where you talk about subordinates just doesn't really sit well with me, because the people are there not to serve you. The leader's position is to serve the others.
Yeah.
So we don't really need a leader if you can't do that. If you're just focused on yourself, then you're better off like as an independent practitioner.
Yeah, it's a great point too, because I think of it's a great point, because if you really think of like any structure or even any organization, when you really, really break it down, the leadership is the foundation.
Yeah.
Especially like what I consider the small unit leaders, the ones that are interacting with the sales, with the support team every day. That really becomes the foundation. And if you have, I call it like, poison. Like if you have a poisonous leader and that level of leadership, it affects the entire organization.
You could even figuratively talk about the plant box, and the foundation you have there is the strategy and the business goals and the vision and the mission and the values. And then you have, those could be the rocks on the bottom. And then you have like the dirt level, which would be then the middle management, so to speak. They provide the seeds, and those seeds are the people who are executing the business goals. And if there is poison in there, things are going to die.
Things are going to die. Yeah, great way to put it. Yeah.
What would you say that gets exposed first when things get hard? Is it that self-preservation?
Yeah, it's the character of the leader, in my opinion. Yeah, that's the thing that gets exposed first.
Many leaders, business leaders, say that they feel constantly under pressure today. I hear this all the time. And even if you like suggest something new, which it easily kind of leads in, oh no, there's no space here to take anything anymore. This is going to overflow. So from your perspective, what would you say is the difference between urgency and panic? And why does that distinction matter so much for leadership?
That's such a great question. I think urgency, it comes down to control. How well can you control your mindset? Because I don't think that there's much, I think the line there is so fine a lot of times. I mean, everybody's not perfect. There's so many times where I've gone into panic mode instead of urgency mode, right? Because you just flip that mental mind switch of like, this is falling apart versus this is just important, needs to get done. Yeah. And I think the benefit or the beauty and the curse of that is it goes both ways, right? Because the line is so fine, in my opinion, you can turn panic into urgency just as quickly as urgency can turn into panic. When it's in your mind, I think that's what you have to continuously remember, is that this can switch just by an action, just in a mindset, just in taking 90 seconds and thinking through or thinking more ahead. You're
talking about like clarity versus just reacting into fires.
Yeah, I've got a leadership framework I'm sure that we'll get into a little bit, but the first decision-making framework is clarity. And I think that perfectly encapsulates exactly what we're describing between urgency and panic, is that word clarity. Are you clear? If you're not clear, you immediately go to panic most times. Right? Even if you don't want to. And that's important to know too, because we shouldn't like be down on ourselves for getting panicked in a situation. If you think that the first time, I hope you don't mind if we talk about this a little bit.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. If you think that the first time, like a Marine in combat, even though they've practiced thousands of times, if you think that the first time they get shot at, they're not scared and they're not panicked, you get this sharp realization that someone is actively trying to kill me. That's a stupid mindset trick, right?
Yeah.
It's how quickly can we turn that panic into urgency, I think, is the better skill. Because I think most people start with panic, at least a little bit, even if it's for a second, 15 seconds. It's okay, clear. Clarity turns it into urgency.
So clarity is control, and panic puts your body into a reactive mode where everything is just focused on staying alive, which may not be the best decision. But this is actually interesting, because if the leaders don't have the clarity over these times, then they're not able to provide the clarity for their people. And with all this change going around and happening, taking place, and forcing organizations to make changes into their daily processes, their tactics, how they operate in general, how they communicate, how they get things done in general. If people don't have a clear idea how this is going to be done, especially when there's so much remote work going on, and that requires us to be able to self-manage, self-lead, then that's like a major risk for the entire business.
Absolutely. You just nailed it too. One of the problems I see with even great leaders is they're not inability, but not focused enough, I would say, to transport that clarity down to the people they're leading, right? A lot of good leaders do a really great job at doing it themselves. And that's what probably makes them an effective leader, but they don't do a good job of exactly what you just talked about. Because we've all been in those situations when we haven't been in maybe those leadership roles, or if you don't have the clarity, everybody around the water cooler is talking about it. What are we doing? What's going on? Yeah, it's that again.
Yeah, exactly. Those who are able to self-lead, they're going to make their own decisions and they're going to make their own interpretations. And that may not be, they might just like jump ahead, go ahead to completely wrong direction. And then there are people who are just going to panic and then they can't do anything. And that can lead to stress, burnout. Yesterday, apparently there was a plane that landed at the Helsinki airport, and there was lots of fire trucks waiting for them because they thought that there was like flames coming out of the plane. And they landed, and the people inside the plane had to be there for quite some time while the firemen were like checking the plane like outside. And they received no information whatsoever. And there was this interview on the newspaper about it, where one of the passengers said that we were not told anything, not anything at all. Only thing we saw was like all these flashing lights all over the place, and these firemen, that they didn't come inside the plane, but they were outside, and we had no clue. And I'm thinking, like, this is like the typical business communication situation, that something urgent or something sudden takes place, and you're not prepared for it. And you think that it's better to be silent than say something. People are seeing that stuff is happening. You could at least say that nothing to worry. And it wasn't anything. I mean, they didn't find any smoke. It was just a false alarm. If you are not being clear and communicating clearly what happens during change and during sudden circumstances in the organization, then people are going to fill in the blanks themselves. That leads into panic or guiding yourself into something that you're not supposed to do, or doesn't help the business at all. You're just wasting time, wasting resources. So it's always better to say something, even if it was just something that we are figuring it out. Just hold on a second. We'll let you know in 5 minutes if we have something more. But like staying silent is not the thing. That leads into panic.
No, there's a really interesting study that Wynn Resorts in Las Vegas, I believe, did. And I might be misquoting. It might be a different hotel chain. So there was we'll just say it's a study on hotels. And they watched people's frustration levels for waiting. And 10 years ago, ish, right? They would get frustrated. People waiting in line at a hotel would get frustrated in roughly 2.5 minutes. 2 years ago, they repeated the study. If they were getting frustrated in 20 seconds of no communication. Here's how they solved it, though, which is really interesting. Goes right to your point. Once they added somebody in the lobby to just explain, hey, we have a little bit of wait time. Please go wait in line. Someone will be there with you in a moment. Just that right there. Instead of just walking in and being confused, it decreased their frustration level all the way back to 2.5. Just by saying, hey, we're a little bit busy right now.
Exactly.
Just by setting that expectation, right? Kind of what you're talking about on the plane. It's like, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much.
Exactly. So stoic leadership, how does that help leaders filter all this noise and focus on clarity?
I think what originally got me into this, I got my degree in business and finance and economics, but I went to college for the majority of the time for history. And I was always really fascinated with philosophy and ancient Greek and European culture. I read this book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. And that really got me thinking of, well, what place does that have? And that mindset is so very interesting to me, of like living in this state. And I know you brought it up earlier, this radical honesty, right? Of this, just living in this state of where you are today and not creating emotional situations that, not to say that you don't need to be emotional sometimes. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that starting in a different mindset and then maybe moving to the emotion, and how that could really promote good leaders, right? To be able to think through clarity and take a second and pause and think about things differently than just, this is an obstacle. How do me and my team get around it? How do you get through it? Because then the obstacle then becomes the way. And that just simple mindset, or that reframe, for me really meant a lot. And I started going down this path of like, well, what place does being a stoic-ish live and breathe in leadership? And I think it's that. I think it's taking the time to make good decisions, right? And understand your place in the world and your place on the team and what your purpose is. So that goes into a lot of the theories that, in some of the stuff that you've already mentioned: purpose, vision, creating things that are non-negotiable in life, that mean something, and stand on principle. And I think that in this world that we've kind of, like you and I were kind of joking before we got on, there's so much crazy stuff going on in the world, right? And being able to sift through and get clear, I think, is kind of stoic, right? Of not getting caught in the noise of or an emotion. Again, I'm not suggesting people just like cut off emotion. I think that's one of the biggest things that when people hear of like stoicism in general, that they're like, oh, this is like the stoic person that has no emotion. That's not it at all. If you do any sort of deep research, these guys were deeply passionate people. They just saw the world as it was. And I think that's stoicism. And that's how stoicism really bleeds into leadership. And why I think it's a necessity is that we have to be super clear. We have to be super, super clear on who we are and where we are and what situation we're in the world. And that's why some of the things that I've built and some of the frameworks, they mesh with that. It's starting in that basis of reality and then moving past. But I think living in that space to begin with, I think is really, really important. Some of the best work I've ever done, and this is where I get away from the stoicism, doesn't have any emotion. Some of the best work I've ever done as a leader, I've been stressed internally or frustrated, and how you turn that emotion into something good, that is the key. It's not just devoiding yourself of emotion. It's how you use that and being conscious of that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking, when there is so much of this noise in the world, the answer is not to noise and motion, so much noise and motion. So the answer is not to shout louder or go faster. It's actually the opposite.
Yes. It's the tagline for my business is slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
You do. I saw that on your website.
And that, I love that you brought that up. That is so, so important. Like, how many times a day now are you getting pulled in a different direction? Especially if you're interested in the topic of management leadership, right? You get on social media, the algorithm is going to absolutely bombard you with 15 gurus that are all telling you something different. At the end of the day, if you're a leader, you're a leader, and trust your gut, right? Exactly. Live in that reality state and trust your gut.
Because your strength as a leader is not with others, I'm not implying to your people. I'm implying to the external world as a whole. Your strength is who you are and how you deploy that, and not try to change your personality and your way of leadership based on what somebody tells, what is the best to any given time. You need to increase your strengths and decrease your weaknesses, and be able to reflect and take feedback from the people who you lead, but not jump after all these hypes and trends in leadership, because as you said, those come and go. But human behavior is, I think, the oldest trend that you can follow, and learn more about that and how to influence others with, your being. And emotions are actually a major part of that, how you use your emotions and how you influence other people's emotions in a good way.
That word that comes to my mind when you say that is authenticity, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
Exactly. How are you an authentic leader? I often recommend this to people, that please read all the books that you can. They're obviously super helpful, but deep inside of you, if you're a leader, you need to figure out what type of leader you want to be first. And I truly believe that.
Yeah.
First, not after, first, and then read the books.
Exactly. So you said that the obstacle is the way. So how do you help leaders stop fighting reality and start working with it instead? Not to go around the obstacles, but
go through it.
Go through. Yeah.
I think it's in a framework that I've created. If you don't mind, we go into it. I think that would be probably the easiest way.
Would be really lovely if you would share about your framework.
Yeah, it's super simple. So it's really there's really 6 things that you can get through. And when I work with clients on this specific thing, my goal is to get them comfortable enough and practiced enough at it that they can get through this framework in 90 seconds, right? They've been asking me a lot of how do you make, in combat specifically, how do you make quick, decisive, strategic, good decisions, right? And so diving deeper into that, I came up with this methodology. And that's super simple, which is what I love about it. That makes actually sense.
Because, 90 seconds, do you even have 90 seconds in the combat situation? So you can't be...
Not even close.
Yeah, exactly.
The biggest misconception, again, about the movies is like the firefights are like 5 hours long and stuff.
Yeah.
I think the last time I read, the average firefight is like 35 to 90 seconds.
Right.
It's super quick and intense, and it feels like a lifetime. But there are 6 things. And the first one is actually the word that we keep using, is clarity. Is you got to get clear. So understand what the obstacle is, right? What is the thing that we need to get through? Totally understand it. In order to do that and get clear on what the direction is, we have to really know and assess the condition that we're in right now. Okay? So you understand what the obstacle is and where you need to go through. And then are we capable sitting right now to be able to do that? Let's say the classic example that I use is you're on a path and there's a giant stone in the road. Now you could go all the way around the town, right? Which takes a lot more time. You could do that, or you can figure out a creative way to get through that said stone, right? Obstacle then becomes the way, that becomes the objective. So you got to look at yourself and say, okay, well, do I have what it takes to get through the stone right now with me today? Or do I need to go gather more tools? Do I need to set myself up in a different environment? I think of people, environment, tools. This is where that AI conversation comes in often. Do we have the tools available to get through this objective as we stand today? If not, go find them. That's step number 2. Step number 3 is just a very real conversation with yourself, which is cost. What is the cost of going through? What is this going to cost us? That one, I think, comes up the most with people. That's where they get stuck a lot. It's what usually stops them from taking action. And it's also something that they don't typically think enough about before they do smaller actions. So perfect example, we're going to go away from the rock in the road for a second. And we're going to go into maybe you being a lead salesperson and going into a leadership role. Why that generally isn't the best idea all the time, and why organizations love to do it, is because they think of one leadership aspect, and that's lead by example. They say, this guy just broke the sales record. We should put him into leadership. Okay, great. But usually often what it takes to break sales records is self first.
Yes.
I'm going to do this. I want the recognition, right? Which is the number one thing that people don't like in a leader. You can't be that way. Oftentimes when lead salespeople, this is just from my personal experience, jump into those leadership aspects, they aren't willing to pay the cost of leadership, which is others first at a bare minimum. Going back to our rock example, it could be how much energy is it going to cost us to get through this rather than go around? So there's the cost aspect of it. Once we figure out those 3, we accept that. And that's where we get the control, right? Clarity, condition, cost equals control. Once we can control that mindset in that situation, then we have to make sure that our first action is in alignment. So that next word is alignment. And I think this was one of those ones that I had to add in. I actually had to, because working with so many clients, we get through the first 3 steps and they tell me their first action of how they're going to get through the said obstacle. And it's got nothing to do with what we just talked about. And you're like, what?
Typical.
Yeah, typical, right?
It is very typical.
We had to add, It is very typical. And I think it's funny that I feel like you have to add it because you do. Because oftentimes you listen to somebody's first action. It's like, no, that's the comfortable action. It's not the uncomfortable one. The one that's going to directly result in getting through that stone in the road. And so then the next one after alignment is the actual physical action of doing said thing. And then the final one, the sixth one, is adaptation. You have to be able to adapt and understand that your first action, your first guess at this, your first run at it might not work.
Right.
And that's okay. The problem is if you don't adjust quick enough. I've got an example in my own life in the last few years where that is really where I fell short, right? I went through these steps, and adaptation, it was a real estate investment, and it just wasn't working the way that I was, but in stubbornness and probably a little bit of ego, I was like, no, I can do it, instead of adapting super, super quickly, right? And so adaptation is huge. If you can get really good at those 6 steps, again, they're incredibly basic. You can make really strategic and tactical decisions, and what I call shooting and moving, like being able to do it on the move in your day to day. That's a big part of, Susanna, my coaching and my business is, this is not a promotion. This is just what it is. I really want to focus on things in leadership and in the moment, right? And not have to wait until and I meditate, but not have to wait till a meditation session on Friday, but like today, how do you get through that? And what are some skills that you can get through right now?
That makes so much sense, because I think that there is the sort of the traditional way of leading businesses, which is from the time when the world wasn't transforming so quickly. Then there is the digitalization and the AI era, and then the geopolitical changes and all of this stuff that is going around in the world. I think that so many leaders still think that they have to plan through everything before they can execute, which means that's okay in the peacetime, but in the wartime, you're going to die if you go into that extent. You have to be able to make quicker decisions and just try it out and then adapt, as you said. Adapt to the moment, adapt to the situation, adapt to the reactions, adapt.
Yeah.
I really like this method of yours. It's really interesting. I love everything that is systematic and sense making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that earlier. I was like, she's gonna dig my way, because I'm a very systematic person.
Yeah. I like it. And actually, it's scientifically proven that our brain loves systems, and it uses so much less energy, which the body obviously wants to reserve for those alarm situations. So we are more tuned towards processes and systems and structured things than chaos. And in a way, it's no-brainer, but still, so many leaders actually create more chaos than system or structure.
They do. Yeah, they absolutely do.
Yeah. And I don't think it's because they really intentionally do it, or like even realize that they do it. I think it's just that what made me laugh is that when you said that you've done all the 3 steps and then the action was like out of the blue, there's a lack of understanding what a strategy means and then how to actually implement it and execute it. You focused on creating business strategies for years, which is crazy during these times, and you only let it out of the box to the people when the management team feels like now this is like set in the stone and the board has approved it and this is how we're gonna go. Probably world changed many times by this time, and then everyone goes back to their own business divisions and just continue as it is. And that strategy is being forgotten. We don't really understand the point of a strategy. It's supposed to be that quick outline. This is where we're going, and then we're gonna adjust this as we go. I don't believe that we can create strategies anymore for the next 5 years. Nobody knows what kind of world we have in 5 years. So, I mean, that kind of your way of thinking is much better. in a world like this. Keep it more simple and adjust it as you go. You have to know what your battlefield is, and you have to know what your resources are. You have to know what the cost is and what you're willing to pay for or not pay for. And you need to know what you expect from this battle. But that's a framework that you have certain points put in there where you focus how you go about. You learn and you see what your strengths and your weaknesses are.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too. I had this client and he called me one day and he was really frustrated. You know, he had this big plan for the week and one of his children got sick and he had to take a bunch of time and he was really frustrated and blah, 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 and all this stuff, right? Which is all natural emotions, right? But, you know, living in that radical honesty state, I said, well, you know, his name is Adam. And I said, Adam, what is your main objective in life? And it was to be a great father and be a good provider. And it's like, well, the obstacle, this is a perfect example. Your child getting sick, that is now the obstacle. That is now your mission for today. And you should be, and we need to be okay with that, because when we look at it, it's in direct relation to what your overall goal, what your overall vision for your life was, is to be a great father and a great husband. Your kid is sick, the mission changed. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to make a couple more sales calls today. Yeah, you might have to cancel a meeting. You're showing up where you said you wanted to show up. And again, that's leadership. Right. Is making that definitive line and saying, yeah, you know what? Mission's changed. It's in alignment with who I am, right? It's clear. Bang, you do it. And that really helped him in the moment of being like, yeah, you're right. This is what I should be doing.
You talk about building those personal performance blueprints so that a leader's best days become the norm. Can you elaborate that a little bit?
Yeah, it goes back to that authenticity word we used earlier, right? I call it these professional performance or authentic blueprints. And I think everybody has one. What the method that I use to uncover what that is for, and this is one of the things that I do with every single client. We have to know this, in my opinion. We need to know what your why is, what your purpose is, right? Like, why are you doing this, what you're doing? Why are you becoming a leader? Why are you a father? Why are you a director? Why are you a CEO? Whatever it is that you're trying to focus in on, you need to understand the vision for that. So there's four aspects of it. There's purpose, there's vision. So, okay, that's great. That's, you know why you're doing it. Now, where is that going? What is the purpose for it in the future? Plan that out. And to your point, I 100% agree with what you said of having these 5-year strategies seems absolutely insane to me and how fast the world's moving now. It really does. Like, it just does. I caught that when you said that. And I was like, yeah, she's 100% right. But that's that vision, right? Like, have a vision, know where you're wanting to go. And then the next one is what I call the ecosystem, right? Everybody knows what ecosystem they thrive best in, or if you don't, it's really helpful to figure that out. And again, just what you only get from me is transparency. One of the things that I struggle with as a solopreneur is I know that I don't function in this capacity at my best. I like being on teams. I like working in a team structure. So that's one of those blueprints of mine that I'm constantly trying to, as a solopreneur, trying to solve for. Like, do I get into mastermind groups? How do I create that ecosystem that I know I thrive in? Right. Instead of just accepting this life by default. No, I can design it. How do I design it? Yeah. So ecosystem, right? And then the final one is what gets you going. I used to struggle with this part of it. It was actually the fourth pillar. I figured out the first three pretty quickly. And I was like, but what's that last one? And for me, coming out of the Marines, one of the things that people associate Marines with is discipline. I think everybody mostly would assume that they're very disciplined people. And in a sense, we are. But discipline comes from or is sparked by motivation. It's very hard to just wake up one day and just be this disciplined person. True. Generally speaking, it requires a sense of motivation or something. In the Marine Corps, that generally is boot camp. You get motivated. You have this deep purpose of belonging. You have this deep purpose of us, like being others focused, right? Even in the mission that you're doing. And how do we replicate that in real life? Like, really coming up with actually what motivates you to do something. And when you combine all four of those aspects of a leader, you start to understand how you lead. And what I think is even more important is when you're able to understand that about the people that you're leading, you'll become a way better leader. Because you actually understand their motivations. You understand the ecosystem that your people need or want to work in. You understand their visions for their life, and you understand why they're working with you. That's huge. But getting that real base of understanding where you are the most impactful builds one keyword that I think is important for everybody on the planet, and that's confidence. If you can really check off each one of those boxes, you will be more confident in everything that you do, because you at least know what situation you need to set yourself up in. You can at least know what type of leader you want to be. Like the purpose of a leader, like what leader are you wanting to be?
Yeah.
What is your vision for leadership? What ecosystem do you need to surround yourself with in leadership? And what is motivating you to be that?
That's so important, because when we work with businesses and organizations, we want to help them clarify what kind of a leadership culture they have, so that they understand what kind of a leadership culture they actually need, so that they can successfully execute their strategy, reach their goals, fulfill their mission, live to their values. That helps also leaders then to clarify that story, that narrative into what they want from their teams. That helps leaders to hire the right kind of aptitude and attitude, and that helps recruiters recognize also who are the best fit for that ecosystem. I think that it's so fundamental for you as a leader to understand who you are as a leader, who you want to be as the leader, who you are not as the leader, because you need to be able to make a leadership promise to your people. I strongly believe in that, so that they know what value you can provide them apart from a paycheck. Because only that way that you can really motivate people to do their best and enjoy the work and enjoy being part of what they are part of, and then enjoy those fruits of labor together. So I think that you're so on point of helping leaders to understand those things, because that helps them also to recognize, like, if they get headhunted into a leadership role, so that their ego doesn't drive over that, so they actually stop and evaluate, assess, ask questions that help them understand, is this the right environment for me to succeed as the leader that I am and as the leader that I want to be?
Yep. It's not all about benefits packages and pay, right? It's got to be
that doesn't make you motivated, because the money is quickly used, but you still have the job every day.
Yep, that's for sure.
In your coaching, what patterns do you see in leaders who think that they are disciplined, but they are not?
Yeah, I think it's basic, but I think it does come down to habits and how you show up every day. When I start to see leaders start to go awry, I'll maybe that's a better way for me to think through it, is they really start to lack accountability. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you start to see most people's discipline, when most people's best intentions really fall to the wayside, is when they're not being held accountable by any stretch of the imagination outside of and again, this is what happens in corporations a lot, at least in my experience, is corporations do a great job of giving leaders sales numbers, sales objectives, right? Or project objectives, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
They don't do a good job of creating and accountability around that. Some things that are super, super tangible, right? That are going to push ROI forward. What they don't do a great job is holding the leaders accountable to how they're showing up as a leader.
That is so true.
That is so
true. Yeah.
And I think that's where it really comes down to, is like leaders probably most leaders that I know want accountability and just lack accountability because there's nothing in that space.
I think it's also something that you should want to ask for. You should want to request, because when you are given these clear expectations, you can also ask the time that you need to fulfill those objectives. Because oftentimes also leadership roles are kind of like sidekicks to your expertise or specialist. Of course, when you're like higher up in the chart, when you're actually supposed to be lower up, but higher up in the chart, then the more you are being asked for, and the less time you actually have to really like mentor and coach and enable your people, your team, to those results and keep the motivations up and so on, and make sure that you stay true to the kind of leader you are and the kind of examples that you set. So I think that asking for accountability is actually works in the leader's interest instead of against it.
It does. Yeah. And I think that if I was especially trying to elevate leaders beneath me, if they were really hesitant to want accountability, that would be kind of like an orange flag to me, like a yellow flag of like,
yeah, I agree. It kind of sounds like you want the status, you want the paycheck,
yeah, but
you don't want the responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a good call out there from you.
Before we finish, I want to talk about a little bit about the leadership in the AI era. So the systems are getting faster. There's all the automation, the constant information flow, the AI, the expectations, and all the news and everything that is stressing and messing us up. From your perspective, how is this acceleration changing what's required of leaders today, internally and externally?
Great question. I think part of it is this acceptance that it's here. It's one of the things that I wouldn't say fight with, but have to maybe sometimes explain. Like you and I were talking about, I'm very into technology. I have been for a long time. And it's fascinating, right? It really is. But what I find with a lot of leaders is they're fighting it too much when it's very much more like this is the .com, right? You're living in it right now. And we can look back at history and realize like you're here and it's not going anywhere. It's making everybody's lives different, some better, some worse, quite frankly, but it is here to stay. And so first thing I would say is stop fighting it, right? Accept that this is, if you think of this as an obstacle, this is the way. And you really have to buy into that. The other thing is if this is a tool in our toolbox, be comfortable using it, right? Yeah. As leaders, you have information now vastly more capable. You can find information so quickly, even if you use things like ChatGPT in the most basic sense. You have your fingertips on information faster than you've ever had it. Utilize that. Utilize that to be a better leader. Utilize that to encourage your people that you're leading to use. Know that job above and below you. Like, be the leader in that space. And if you understand that this is here to stay, dive deep, because it will only make you a more effective leader, in my opinion. Look, think about this for a second. Like, leaders, a lot of times, you get on calls and it's like, hey, I got this really tough conversation you need to have with a staff member. Okay, great. You can literally program, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, you can program ChatGPTs to review a book like Crucial Conversations, and give it your explanation and give a really solid, now, I don't think that's the final thing you should do, but give yourself a solid base of how to walk into conversations, and you can have that answer, as we both know, in 60 seconds. One of my leadership tenets, one of the pillars that I have for leaders is you have to be a chess player. You have to be thinking 13 moves ahead. And that's where I think truly AI really aligns with the leadership style that I have, is that if you're being a good leader, you're thinking 13 moves ahead and you're not fighting what you know to be true. This is the reality that you live in right now, and it's a leader's job to live there. Yeah. Right. Be a dreamer for sure, but you have to have a basis in reality. And that reality is that AI is here to stay. And if you want to be the most effective leader possible, you need to jump into it. You have to. You have to be good and proficient at it, right? Especially with the younger generation, if you're leading them, they're going to be way beyond you in a matter of a month. You have to understand how they're able to work and how they're able to succeed. Be able to give them tools and encourage them to use those tools.
You're so right on point on that as well. So for leaders listening who feel overwhelmed by this noise and pressure and constant demands, what would you say is the first internal shift that they should make before changing anything externally?
It's pretty simple. It actually goes back to vision, in my opinion. The amount of people I talk to that don't have a clear path forward and are just kind of either leading or existing without the path, I think is wild to me. And so most of the time, when you really get set on the vision that you've created for your life, a lot of things start to fall in place. A lot of decisions start to fall off that you don't need to make or that aren't in alignment. You're like, why am I actually doing that now? And so I know that, again, sounds basic, but I can't stress that enough of like, Have a vision. Know where you're going. Know where you're going.
So that is so solid, and that's what people expect from leaders. Leaders are there to envision and show us the way. If you're not going to do that, can you honestly call yourself a leader?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that's my point. But the majority, not the majority, but there's so many people I walk into that just don't have that.
It's true. But they need that confidence, and that confidence comes from understanding who you are as a leader now, who you want to be as a leader. What is your promise to the people that you will lead, so that you can also recognize who you will not be the best leader for, so that you're not going to disappoint them, end up in conflicts. The more we understand who we are as a leader, what are our strengths as a leader, what are we suited for, or who are we suited for the best, the more pleasurable being a leader will be. And then that when there's noise, the answer is not to shout louder, but to maybe whisper. And when there's lots of motion, the answer is not to run faster, but to stop. So take the pause, think about it, and give clarity. The clarity doesn't have to be 5 years ahead. It's just, even if it was just today ahead, that would be good.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the point. It doesn't, you're right. It doesn't need to be this massive thing. It just needs to be clear. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Jon. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And for our listeners, I'll be adding links to the show notes page for you for this episode, links and the insight that Jon will provide us. And I hope that today's conversation gave you something to think about, surely gave me lots to think about, and maybe something to see a little more clearly. So leadership, communication, change, these are not about perfection. These are about awareness, responsibility, and the choices that we make every day, which can be yes and no. So let's be more confident also to say no to those things that are not within that path, that vision that we have. So thank you everyone for being here and for listening to our wonderful guest Jon today. And I'll see you all again next week on the Story Driven Business Podcast. Until then, take good care.
Thank you.